and welcome. So today we're just going to be talking about HLD, or hind leg degeneration, also known as Hind degeneration. So I've talked about this a few times. It comes up pretty frequently, and it's going to continue to come up pretty frequently, as I'll talk about in a minute. And I thought I would just do a dedicated video on it. So first off, if you watched last week's video and you're curious on how Orville is doing, she is doing great. She's somewhere in this cage. All I see is Warren. I don't see anyone else. But, yeah, so her wounds finally started to shrink and close up, and currently it is scabby. And I believe that very soon, like next couple of days, that scab will fall off, and she'll have healthy, fresh skin underneath it. And hopefully the infection will not come back and we won't be going through this again, but we will see. Unfortunately, it looks like her gland is swelling up again. I can't tell for sure. The area, it's like right next to her urethra. It's very squishy, and I don't remember it being this squishy before. So I don't know if perhaps, because it's a little complicated. So I don't know if perhaps that gland is like deflating because the medicine's no longer in there or what, but it's just weird. But she's doing okay. She is happy. She is healthy. She is active. She doesn't appear to be in any pain. And I am monitoring her closely to make sure the infection does not come back. Okay. Orville update aside, let's get into talking about the HLD stuff. So first off, I'm going to be talking about how you can tell if your rat has HLD. I don't want you to panic if your rat is showing any of these symptoms, because for the most part, these can have multiple reasons. It doesn't necessarily immediately mean that they have HLD, and even if they do, it's not immediately problematic, which I'll get into. But I want to talk about it a little bit because my rat Ducky, she's very old. She's 2 years and 8 months old. She is showing early signs of HLD. And since I'm going to be talking about it again, because if you've been here a while, like from the beginning, there was Wookie who had HLD, and then Humdrum got HLD, and then Sailor got HLD. So I've basically been talking about it the entirety of my channel. So here we are. I'm going to talk about it again with Ducky. So first of all, HLD, or HED, hind leg, or hind end degeneration, is something that older rats tend to get. More common in male standards than female standards. It is very uncommon in dwarfs. So like my girls here probably won't get it. My friend, her name's Dazzling Rats on Instagram, if you'd like to go and give her a follow. She's the one who knows a ton about dwarves and like got me even more interested in getting my girls. Only one rat that she's seen that's a dwarf has gotten HLD. So it is very uncommon in dwarf rats. But anyway, what is HLD? HLD is when their back end, when a rat's back end basically starts to go slowly paralyzed. So with standard rats, because again, it's not very common in dwarfs, with standard rats, it's more common in males because of how large they are. Because HLD is typically because their kidneys are losing function. And because male rats are so large, all their organs have to work a lot harder to keep their body running than female rats. Or at least that is the working theory. But like many things with rats, it is more common in one sex, but not uncommon necessarily in the other. So with male rats, it is more common. I don't know how likely it is to happen. I do see it quite a bit. It is a very common thing to happen with older rats. With female rats, less so. And I will say all the female rats I have who have gotten HLD were spayed. That's probably a coincidence because those are also my oldest rats. Just going to interrupt myself real quick to say that that is not actually true. My rat Caper also had HLD, but unlike everyone else, it was not an old age related issue with her. She had a stroke, which prompted the HLD to start. This can happen, though it's not very common. And with her, when she passed away, it was because the paralysis was getting very bad. But I do think she had a secondary stroke, which caused it to have a lot quicker of an effect, because basically from the time she had her first stroke to when I had to put her to sleep, it was only about 2 months, and the time between when the HLD started to progress quickly, and the time when I had to put her down was about 2.5 weeks. So that was the case with Caper. Wookie died at 2 years, 10 months old. Sailor was 2 years, 11 months old. Humdrum was 3 years and 2 months old. And Ducky is currently 2 years and 8 months old. So they're all quite a bit older. And spaying them is the reason they got to such a great age, in my opinion, because spaying a female rat young, or at least before they have issues with tumors — my cat is playing with my dog stairs — spaying a female rat before they have issues with tumors does tend to give them quite a long life. So that's probably why. It's just they get older, things stop functioning. But yeah, another cause for HLD is arthritis. It is not as common. Rats can get arthritis. Any animal with joints can get arthritis. So you won't necessarily notice it with rats too much because they're very good at hiding pain. But if they're still getting around okay, then I wouldn't worry about it too much. If they have HLD, you can get urine testing strips and basically just pop them into a sanitized carrier. And when they pee, just drop the strip in and I'll tell you what their kidney function is like. I don't really do that personally. I just treat the symptoms. So, anywho, how can you tell if your rat has HLD? So, there are a few things. The most common thing you'll hear people talk about is the duck walk, which it can be earlier signs, but I consider it more like an intermediate stage. So the duck walk is literally where they aren't dragging their back end necessarily, but their feet slide out from them like this while they're walking, and it's like a little duck waddle. And then from then on, it just kind of gets worse. So they'll start dragging their back end, their tail will be completely limp, they'll have trouble balancing, and you'll need to stuff their cage with a lot of things to make sure that they don't fall. Because that is the biggest danger with HLD, is that they'll stop being able to climb, but they'll still try to climb. Because rats never give up. They continue trying to do their thing way past when you feel like they should try. But earlier signs, if you want to try and catch it a little bit earlier, one thing is their tail does often go limp pretty fast. So if you pick up their tail and drop it, and if it just falls and they don't like try and catch it at all, because if you do that with a healthy rat, if you just like lift their tail up, they just kind of stays up and then like they pull it down themselves. If you do that and their tail just drops, that can be a sign of early HLD. Some rats are lazy and just don't bother holding their tail up. Like my boys, Ezra and Fitz, I mess with their tails all the time and they don't have HLD. They just don't feel like holding their tail up, so they don't. But that is an early sign. Another early sign is knuckling, which is where when they're walking, their back legs, their toes, when they're walking, will curl as they walk, as opposed to walking flat-footed. General weakness in the back end, I find, is an early sign of HLD. So Sailor, my first indication that there was something wrong is she would walk and her end would just bob down. So she'd take a step, bob, take a step, bob. And it to me looked like a little bit of, it wasn't limping, it wasn't like lameness. It was that she couldn't keep her feet high enough up to keep her back end straight. So that was my first indication with Sailor. Another indication, like even if they're not doing all of this, they do have a weaker back end. Like their legs aren't quite working the way that they were. So like you'll notice like if they're climbing and they just kind of stop on the bars for a second, they seem to be trying to like get the momentum up in their legs to pull themselves up more. That can also be a sign. Another symptom is that you'll notice sometimes that they'll brace one hand on the ground and eat with the other hand. And the reason they do this is because it's hard for them to sit up because their legs can no longer balance them. So they'll use their hand to balance and eat with the other hand. Now, keeping in mind that these symptoms can be symptoms of other things. So like Foggy, for example, has a tail issue. She had a spinal injury, I think, during intros. Not even when they were in this cage. It was when they were in the little blue cage where the fall was like this big. I don't know what happened necessarily. But basically, the bottom portion of her tail does not have a lot of function. She has about half function in the part closest to the base of her hind end, and then the tip of her tail, it's just limp. She doesn't have HLD, her tail is just messed up. As for like bracing one hand on the ground and eating with one hand, that can be a symptom of a pituitary tumor because it's hard for them to eat. I've seen rats do that when they have a pituitary tumor, but typically it's more often that they'll rest the food on the ground and eat it like that. So again, don't panic if your rat's doing that. They're probably just having trouble balancing. If your rat is starting to show these symptoms, the best thing in my opinion is to get some Apacatin and give them a pinch of that in their food every day. I mix it with some baby food. They eat it right up. Never had an issue. I did that with Sailor, Humdrum, and now Ducky. It's also good to keep them on a kidney-friendly diet, which means lower protein. This is easier if you're not feeding a pelleted food, because if you're feeding something like Oxbow has a 14% protein, which is higher than the recommended amount for males over 18 months old. The recommended amount for males over 18 months is 12% or around 12%. My rats are all on a kidney-friendly diet because while they can go up to 14%, keeping them at 12% even when they're younger is not that big of a deal, as long as they're not babies. Babies need a higher percent protein, so over 14 weeks old, it is safe to put them on a kidney-friendly diet, which can help keep them from developing HLD. So that's all mine are on a kidney-friendly diet that I make. I do the Shoot My diet. You can also give them kidney-friendly foods or like flaxseed oil. They'll go nuts for flaxseed oil and it is good for the kidneys. So things like that, just like good things for their kidneys, can help prevent HLD and help it from progressing further than what you're saying. It's not going to stop. It will keep getting worse, but it's basically like, a beaver dam. They put the dam in, the water flows around it, and not as much gets through. That's basically what it is. So you give them the Apacatin and it binds the proteins in their system so that it doesn't damage the kidneys further. And this is not going to prevent the HLD from getting worse, because once it starts, it's just going to keep going, but it can slow it down. So it's likelihood that the HLD is going to become a problem with quality of life. Well, this really depends on your rat and the situation. So like with my rats that have had HLD, Wookie and Sailor both ended up having to be put to sleep because of it. Wookie just kind of lost her zest for life and it was just too hard. It was getting really hard for her to get around. And the point at which we decided to take her in is she decided to lay on her side to eat because she couldn't hold herself up anymore. And then with Sailor, she couldn't climb anymore, so she just kind of sat in the back corner sleeping, waiting for one of us to notice so that we could go put her in the hammock with Lockley and Grant. Humdrum did not pass from HLD. Humdrum got a tumor on her stomach that it didn't rupture it, but it developed a hole in the center. So it was a cancerous tumor. She was too old to remove it. She had HLD. I decided to let her go. So a lot of people say like it'll progress more with males than with females. Obviously, I just taught you about how 2 of my girls ended up passing away from it. So like it will continuously creep up the body and get worse and worse and worse. I have seen rats that were way past the point where I would have called it with HLD, because it does get worse and worse. So if this typically happens with older rats, it's not a guarantee that this is going to be what makes you have to make the call, but there is a chance that it will be. It just depends, because some rats just don't develop anything else. It's just the HLD. But again, like Humdrum had it for, I think, 6 months before she passed away, and she didn't pass away from that. Wookie had it for about the same amount of time, 6 to 8 months. Sailor had it for about 8 months, and that's a long time for a rat. That's a really long time. So I wouldn't panic or worry necessarily. Just treat it, make sure their cage is super safe, pack it with as much stuff as you can. Even if you have younger rats, just kind of accept that for a little while their cage isn't going to be as active of a layout as you would like, because you have to cater to the oldies, obviously. They're old. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, you know what to do. All the fun stuff down below. And I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye!